All right, let's dive into the very beginning of Western thought, back to ancient Greece. Because this whole thing, this entire intellectual adventure, really started with just two fundamental questions. Questions that, honestly, we're still wrestling with today.
So, first up, the big one. Imagine these early Greek thinkers looking around at the stars, the ocean, the mountains, and asking a question that nobody had really asked before. What is all this stuff? What's it really made of, deep down? This wasn't about gods or myths. It was about finding the one single underlying principle of everything. That question was basically the starting pistol for philosophy.
But they didn't just look out at the cosmos. They also started to look inward. They asked, okay, given what the world is, how are we supposed to live in it? What's the best way to be a human being? And that's the second massive question. You see the pivot. It goes from the cosmic to the personal, from physics to ethics, and it drives the rest of our story.
And what's so cool is how these questions got passed down through the centuries. I like to think of it as a philosophical relay race. Each new generation of thinkers took the baton of inquiry, ran their leg of the race, and then handed it off to the next. Sometimes they'd veer off in a totally new direction, but that race to find the answers, it just kept going.
So let's go right back to the starting line. The first runners in this race are what we now call the pre-Socratics, and they were absolutely obsessed with that first big question. What is the universe made of? They were on the hunt for the one thing that could explain everything else.
The key term for them was arche. Now, this didn't just mean the beginning, like what was there at the dawn of time. For the very first philosopher, a guy named Thales, the arche was the underlying reality of things right now. He famously proposed it was water, probably because he saw that all life seems to depend on moisture. It sounds simple to us, but it was revolutionary. It was the first attempt at a purely natural explanation for the entire cosmos.
Well, the race very quickly hit its first major clash. In one lane, you've got Heraclitus. For him, the only reality is constant, unending change. He famously said you can't step in the same river twice because it's always flowing. Reality, for him, is that flow. But then, in the other lane, you've got Parmenides, who argued the exact opposite. He said, no, change is just an illusion. Our senses trick us. True reality is one eternal, unchanging thing that you can only grasp with pure, cold logic.
This quote from Heraclitus just nails his worldview. When he says war, he doesn't mean bloodshed. He means this constant creative tension between opposites, hot and cold, life and death, day and night. For him, this cosmic war is actually what creates balance and harmony in the universe. It's a really dynamic, powerful way of seeing things.
Now, to defend his teacher Parmenides and this idea of unchanging reality, a philosopher named Zeno came up with these brilliant, mind-bending paradoxes. The most famous one involves the hero Achilles in a race with a tortoise. The tortoise gets a little head start. Achilles, being super fast, runs to where the tortoise was. But in that time, the tortoise has crawled a little bit further. So Achilles has to cover that new distance, but in that time, the tortoise has moved again. Logically, this goes on forever into smaller and smaller distances. Zeno's point was a zinger. If you trust pure logic, it seems Achilles can never catch the tortoise, even though our eyes tell us he obviously would. It was a powerful argument that maybe our senses can't be trusted.
So, after about a century of debating atoms and the void, the baton is handed off, and the race takes a huge turn. This is all happening as Athenian democracy is on the rise, a time when public speaking and the art of persuasion were everything. And a new group of thinkers, the Sophists, step onto the track. And let me tell you, they were way more interested in human affairs than in the makeup of the cosmos.
This famous quote from the Sophist Protagoras really sums it all up. What he meant is that there is no absolute objective truth out there. Truth is relative. It's measured by each individual person. What seems true to you is true for you, and what seems true to me is true for me. You can see how this was a radical shift towards individualism.
But this creates a massive problem, doesn't it? If your truth and my truth are complete opposites, but both are considered equally valid, then the whole concept of truth itself starts to crumble. I mean, if there's no objective right or wrong, how do we know anything for sure? How do we build a society on that? This is the philosophical chaos that the next runner, Socrates, is about to step into.
Socrates grabs the baton and runs in a completely different direction. He totally rejected the Sophists' idea that truth was relative. He was convinced that universal truths about things like justice and virtue absolutely existed.
But he didn't preach. Instead, he developed this incredible technique, acting as a philosophical midwife. He wouldn't give you the answers, he would just ask question after question after question, forcing you to examine your own beliefs, expose the contradictions, and help you give birth to a clearer understanding that was inside you all along.
And this brings us to the anchor legs of our relay race. I'm talking about the heavyweights, Socrates' most brilliant student Plato, and then Plato's most brilliant student Aristotle. These two took Socrates' search for universal truth and built it into two of the most comprehensive and influential philosophical systems the world has ever seen.
And the contrast between these two is just night and day. Plato, he was the ultimate idealist. He's looking up. He argued that this physical world we see around us isn't even the real world. It's just a flawed, flickering shadow of a higher, perfect reality, a world of eternal forms or ideas. Aristotle, on the other hand, he brought philosophy crashing back down to earth. He's looking down. For him, reality is right here, in front of us. It's in the individual things we can see, touch, observe, and categorize.
To really get what Plato was talking about, you have to know his famous allegory of the cave. So, picture this. There are these prisoners who have been chained up their entire lives in a cave, forced to face a blank wall. Behind them is a fire, and people are carrying objects in front of the fire, which casts shadows onto the wall.
Now here's the key. For these prisoners, those flickering shadows are the only thing they've ever known. So the shadows aren't like reality, they are reality. They'd give them names, they'd study their patterns, they would have absolutely no concept that these were just faint copies of real, solid objects. So what happens when one of these prisoners is suddenly freed and dragged out of the dark cave and into the world outside? At first, the sunlight, which for Plato represents truth and knowledge, is completely blinding and painful. But as their eyes adjust, they finally see the world as it truly is. For Plato, this is the journey of the philosopher. It's a difficult, painful process of moving from the darkness of ignorance into the bright, beautiful light of true understanding.
So after the towering systems of Plato and Aristotle, the baton gets passed one last time in the ancient world. The whole scene has changed. Alexander the Great's conquests have created this massive, multicultural, and often chaotic empire, and philosophy takes another turn. It becomes less about building these grand, all-encompassing theories and much more about answering that second great question. In a crazy, unpredictable world, how can I find personal peace?
Two major schools popped up with different answers. First, you had the Epicureans. Their goal was ataraxia, which basically means inner tranquility or freedom from disturbance. And they argued you get there not by going wild, but by seeking modest, simple pleasures. Things like good friends, learning, and peace of mind, while avoiding pain. Then you had the Stoics, who had a totally different take. Their goal was virtue. They believed real happiness comes from accepting what you can't control and focusing only on what you can, your own character, your own choices. It was all about living in accordance with reason and facing whatever life throws at you with calm resolve.
And so the ancient Greek leg of this relay race comes to an end. But the conversation? Well, it never really does. The Greeks didn't give us all the answers, not even close. But what they gave us was something even more important. They gave us the questions, the really big questions about reality, truth, and how to live a good life that we are all, every single one of us, still trying to answer today. They lit the torch, and in our own way, we're all still running the race.